What dark history do you know about your family? My paternal grandfather was shot and killed. I knew this for a number of years, but never received any more information, and I was consistently told by my father that it was a stray bullet. Finally, after researching my family line, my sister and I came across a news article about his death. My grandfather had left my grandmother and was staying in a hotel while going through the divorce. He was shot and killed in that room. My grandmother was the prime suspect, and it was concluded that she hired someone to kill her soon-to-be ex-husband. It was never proven, and she was never charged. My father and aunt are certain she did it, and won't speak to her between his death and until hers. When she died, she left all of her and their late father's money, a large fortune, to her college, none to her children. They took legal action to get some of the money, ended up being a little less than 5% each, on the grounds that she had murdered their father to keep his money. She was also apparently an insane alcoholic and emotionally abusive shut-in, but I learned that one from other stories I heard about their childhood in Long Island. TL. Dr. Paternal grandfather was edit, allegedly murdered by hitman, hired by paternal grandmother. My family was the largest bootleggers in the Ossex area during Prohibition. The areas they sold in included southern Missouri, western TN, northeast Oklahoma and Tulsa, northern Arkansas, and parts of Kansas. They worked with the Italian Mayfair in Street Louis. In one of the few my grandma has told about it, and she showed me the journal of my great-grandpa Fritz. My family's main base was in Ava, Missouri, which is very rural even today. For the first few years that they did it, they didn't have any Mayfair connections, so everything really dirty they needed to get done, they did it themselves. They killed off competition. There was a lot of customers that owed money getting beat, wives or kids taken hostage, or burning down homes. The worst thing I found in the journal, apparently the government came to investigate. 4 guys in suits came onto the farm and wanted to look around. My great-grandpa's cousin got scared and killed all of them, buried them out in the woods, and took their car to the south. The still is on the property somewhere still, underground. The barn that was on top of it burned down. My grandma is the only person who knows where it is, because some historical society wants to know more about it and take a look at the property. I think my grandma might be afraid of what they will find. My grandfather was in the Pacific Theater of World War II. He told me that when they were on Okinawa they found these Japanese soldiers raping and killing women in a small village. His unit went in and shot some of the soldiers and disarmed the rest. They held the soldiers up in front of the rest of the village and cut off their heads while they were still screaming. After that, he said they played a round of football with the Japanese officer's head. He showed me pictures they took after the incident. Scarred for life. My uncle was sexually molested by the deacon of their church as a kid. When he tried telling his parents, they didn't believe him, because in the 1950s the reputation of the accused was more important. It continued for 6 years, until he became too old. He began drinking at 14, and by 18 he had a serious addiction to alcohol, benzos and quaaludes. He was caught trying to steal a car, and given the option of jail or joining the army. He joined the army, and was promptly sent to Vietnam for 3 years. He came home from the army, and at age 25 began acting strangely. He would cut his hands and feet to resemble stigmata, and insist that spies from the Vatican were telling lies about him to the neighborhood. He was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic with religious-based hallucinations and delusions. My family had him committed to the Illinois State Psychiatric Hospital, and he seemed to get a little better there, but was still very much mentally ill. This past July, the hospital he was in was closed by the governor. My uncle was given the option to go into a group home facility or to try independent living. He chose the latter, and we haven't seen or heard from him since July 2nd, when the facility closed. My grandfather was in Vietnam, and he witnessed a napalm strike. There was a little girl who crawled to him, screaming and begging for help, and my grandpa was too shocked to do anything. He shot her on the head to put her out of her misery. He said she couldn't have been more than 5. Not mine, but my boyfriend's grandfather worked for the Cray twins' notorious British gangsters. I've heard a few stories of blackmail. They threatened to murder him and his family if he didn't do stuff for them. Aside from having a really mafia-involved family, my great-grandmother was a prospective bride for Mussolini. Apparently my family was very rich and pretty active in Italian politics, but wasn't his biggest fan. So when he started coming on to her, my family fled to America to protect her. One of my more distant relatives still has the many love letters he wrote her. I have no idea why she kept them, but I'm probably not a great person to be telling the story. One day my grandfather started dressing up to leave the house. It was the middle of winter in Canada. I was about 4 or 5 years old and the only other person home. I asked him where he was going and he replied, "This is the last time you'll ever see me again." I remember not really understanding what he meant by that since I was so young. Before he left, he wrote something down on a big piece of cardboard using a stinky black permanent marker and set the note down by the toaster. I couldn't read at the time, so I have no idea what it said. Later that evening, he still hadn't come home yet. Eventually the cops get called and we find out he's dead. Apparently he went to a nearby cemetery with a bottle of vodka, sat down near a grave, and drank himself into a stupor. He froze to death as Russian. To her dying breath, my grandma denied there ever being a note. I know there was with absolute certainty. The marker he wrote it with remained in my grandma's basement for many years, and I would take off the cap from time to time, and the smell was so distinctive. It would take me back to that moment every time. And now that my grandma is gone, we'll never know what it said. How do you know this? What an awful thing to do to your grandmother. I have a great aunt and uncle who were involved in a murder-suicide. I believe he killed her and then shot himself. Found out about through a news clipping posted to Ancestry.com. He was my grandfather's brother. My great uncle was the chief ballistics expert on the Warren Commission that investigated JFK's death and confirmed the one-shooter theory. He had a mysterious heart attack on a plane some years later. Arthur Zemian. I created a throwaway for this one. My grandfather, my mom's father, was a disgusting man. I hope he's burning in hell. Anyway, here's my mom's story. My mom was raped by her father from the age of 7 until the last time he did it, when she was 19. My grandmother knew. My grandfather had bullets, each for each member of the family. He had their initials carved in their bullet. He told my mom and grandmother, if they ever told, he'd shoot them both and then himself. He also raped at least 3 other children, including a 9-year-old girl in a grocery store bathroom. He lived a completely free life. He was never even arrested. My dad told me this several years ago. My mom doesn't speak about it. My dad said he found out when he was still in law school and my mom was a school teacher. He was home before her and watching one of those talk shows. The topic was people struggling with having a past of sexual abuse. Everything on the show reminded him of my mom and he freaked out. He confronted her about it when she got home and she told him the story I repeated above. I was a very small child, like 2 at the time. My dad was pissed because she knew this and allowed my sister and I to stay with our grandparents periodically. They're divorced now. I have no memory of ever being abused, but sometimes I wonder. I wonder more about my sister. She is 5 years older, which I think he preferred given my mom's age and the 9-year-old girl. As for my mom, she told me she forgave her father on his deathbed. She has always been a nutty person. We have never had a great relationship. We don't speak much. Edited for readability. I learned recently that my great uncle tried to rape my mom when she first came to America from the Philippines. She was taking a shower and locked the door and apparently he barged in and attempted to rape her. This was a member of my family who I loved and respected. I learned this from my dad who told me when I was alone in the car with him before going out to dinner with my sister. My parents are divorced. The reason my mom hasn't told anyone else in the family aside from her now ex-husband is because it would tear our large family apart. My great uncle and great aunt have been married for over 60 years and it would devastate everyone if word got out. He'll never look at him the same again. I had a cousin that apparently committed suicide, but my family says that it was actually a drug deal gone bad. Their proof is you don't run through the house shooting walls before getting to your room and shooting yourself in the head. Technically not my family, but my half-brother's grandfather He was crazy and paranoid schizophrenic, and everyone is sure that the reason the black man at the back of his property disappeared was because he killed him, buried him under the house, and stole his land. My grandma had a daughter between my mom and my uncle. She was given away to a stranger because my grandma didn't have enough money to raise her and was tired of having daughters. I've got an aunt out there that I don't know. Background: my grandma has manuscript pretty bad and has been in a wheelchair for as long as I can remember. She has dementia as well, not sure when it started, and I'm sure she has some other issues as well. My grandpa died of cancer when I was in middle school, which I didn't even really know he had until the end, but I guess he'd been battling it off and on for years. When I was in early/mid elementary, my grandma moved in with us. I didn't think much of it at the time and I don't remember my parents' explanation for it. I just assumed it was because my grandpa was old and having trouble caring for her. She stayed with us a few years and then moved back in with my grandpa. My mom told me last night that she actually came to live with us because my grandpa tried to strangle her. TL. Doctor, my grandpa tried to strangle his old wife. All these great stories, and all I have is the standard cheating father married the cheater with a side dish of cover up. She doesn't know that I know her past. She acts as a very righteous Christian, so it's quite funny to drop little hints. I love this movie where the cheating woman tears the family apart. It's pretty clear she's just terrible, right? My wife's grandfather was a scientist involved with the Manhattan Project. Bonus: her family has a piece of the first nuclear reactor. They made it into a paperweight. I posted this one in another thread a while ago. It was something I never would have expected from my dad. Although knowing him, I can now see how it happened. There are other stories about him, but this is definitely the one that sticks out the most in my mind. This is actually a story my mom told me very recently, and it's completely changed my perception of my dad. My dad hated one of our German shepherds when I was growing up. Our dogs slept outside, and this particular one, Kaiser, would bark all night. My mom and I tuned it out, but my dad couldn't. He became increasingly impatient with him and would always kick him or abuse him in some manner. Being only 8 years old, I just assumed this was the way he got the dogs to respect him, and respect him they did. Poor Kaiser would piss himself every time my dad got near. One night, my dad woke up from the barking, mumbled something, and got up and went outside. My mom figured he would just scold him. When she realized that he had been gone for quite a while and that the barking had stopped, she got up to go see what was going on. She found my dad outside, calmly tying Kaiser by the neck with a leash to the clothing line. She flipped and ran at him with flailing fists, screaming, "No, you won't do that. I won't let you do that." He got startled, slapped my mom, pulled her by her hair, and swung her against the wall of the house. I vaguely remember waking up amidst the commotion and finding her crying and shaking in the living room, mumbling about calling the police. She said that was the only time in their 25 years of marriage that he said, "I'm sorry." I don't have any proof besides family mumblings, but apparently my grandmother's sister was allegedly murdered by another one of her sisters. They got into a fight one day, and after that no one saw her again except for the sister who kept saying, "Oh, don't worry, she's just fine and doing great. No one is allowed to bring it up." My mom's paternal grandfather was a notorious womanizer, bandit, and overall badass/bastard. As a teenager, he killed soldiers and revolutionists during the Mexican Revolution. During this time to up until he was 60ish, he fathered 30-something children and only acknowledged 5. He had married 6 women, killed 4, and all the wives were related somehow: mother, daughter, sister, cousins, etc. At the same time, he had different women on the side. Later, he was considered an unofficial mayor of a small village he founded. He was wanted by the Mexican government after the revolution and was considered a very dangerous man. He burned down several government buildings, churches, and hospitals to show he didn't have an allegiance. He lived until he was 102. There were countless of people that wanted to kill him. In his last years he was extremely superstitious, believing in a heaven/hell, mythical creatures, and stuff like that. He claims to have seen the devil and made a deal with him. My grandfather's brother still has the proof contract in blood. Locals from his town believe he buried treasure somewhere in the hills with everything he stole, including Zapata's boots. He was actually mentioned in a military general's autobiography as the man he wished he could have killed. I think a distant cousin of mine is writing a book on him. My great-great-grandfather was an evil man. He was a bare-knuckle boxer, killed a person outside a pub bar. He sent his ribs up into his heart. He killed all 3 of his wives. The first he threw out a barn top window, he worked the second one to death, and the third was never found. He threw 6 policemen off a bridge for killing his second wife. He fed his dogs before he fed his family. But the worst was he sent his 14-year-old son to fight in WWI by forging the application slip and adding to his age. My cousins were cocaine dealers. Very wealthy, then they started getting high on their own supply and got caught. Now one is doing okay and is out of jail, while the other became a junkie and has been in and out of jail. He recently robbed a bank, but he didn't do it like the Joker, and he got caught. It made the front page of the local paper and everything. Luckily we have different last names. One of my ancestors, many generations back, was a pretty bad guy. He was English and was given land in Ireland with the responsibility of keeping the native Irish down. I've heard 2 stories about him. One, that he invited a whole bunch of Irish families to some kind of gathering as a gesture of peace, but it was a trap and they were all killed, women and children included. The other story was that he was in a battle and it was not going well, so he ordered his men to stay and fight while he retreated. Allegedly, he was only able to escape by literally using his own men as human shields. When one was killed, he'd grab another to cover him. He was not fondly remembered.